Merkel Media.
I'm exhausted, looking for everything in the shadows. Start looking at people like they don't matter. I'm waking up to the fact, more than a little bit shallow. I'm lost in this hole, but I don't wanna. I'm lost in this hole, 'cause I'm just trying to
What's good, everybody? This is Joel Thomas, and this is Free the Rabbits. And how are all the free-range rabbits doing out there today? Before we start with this week's episode, make sure you smash the like button if you're on YouTube, subscribe, hit the notifications, and share the episode. If you're on Rumble, do the same thing. If you're on any other podcast platform, make sure you're giving a 5-star review. Make sure you're leaving a review, any place that you can do it, and share the show. That's the best way for this entire podcast to get out there, is to share the show. All right, guys, let's get into the episode. Well, guys, we are finally here at the final episode of this mini-series I've been calling Secrets of the Solomon Islands, where we've been jumping down all kind of rabbit holes about giants, about UFOs, diamond snakes, dragon snakes, reptilians, anything and everything that's been said to pop up out of these cave systems underground across the Solomon Islands, and even what they consider to be the ancient Mu or Atlantis of the Pacific Ocean. So for people that are just joining us now, little bit of backstory before we jump right into the final episode, episode 4 of this mini-series. This entire mini-series is based on a book written by a guy named Marius Boirayan, and he wrote a book called Solomon Island Mysteries, Accounts of Giants and UFOs in the Solomon Islands. Now, Marius is the son of a World War II Central France resistance leader and grew up in Mount Hagen in the Papua New Guinea Highlands. Following a career in the Royal Australian Air Force and as an aircraft helicopter engineer, he worked the outback Australia, and in 1995, he decided to go to the Solomon Islands and live. Currently, he lives in Queensland, Australia, as far as we know, because this book was put out in 2010. Now, he had a website that he put out in 2002, which no longer exists on the internet. Now, I know a few people have hit me up and said that it exists on the Wayback Machine, and that particular link is to a different website that he put out that was about the book when he dropped the book in 2010. The original website does not exist anymore. It does show up on the Wayback Machine, but it's not there anymore. Now, I did have a listener, a contact from Australia, send me a page from the original website, which I thought was very interesting, but the entire website doesn't exist anymore. So there's a page on one of these Wayback Machine type websites that exist, but as far as the entire website, it doesn't exist anymore. Now, the page that my contact sent me, I was able to show you some maps on the second episode, so you were able to see where some of these UFO or subterrestrial points were that these UFOs, these diamond snakes, these dragon snakes, because that's what the natives called them, were coming out of. So this is what this whole series has been based on, is Marius Boirayan's time in the Solomon Islands and talking to literally hundreds of different islanders as he bounced between Malaita, Guadalcanal, all these different islands, and he was able to get information from them where they told him stories about giants, told him stories about UFOs, told him stories about reptilians, all of these things, and he was able to compile them in a book. And not only that, he had hundreds of his own stories that he was able to share, obviously not all of them in the book, but over the period of time he was there, he had a lot of interactions with not only UFOs, but also a quarter caste giant named Jenny that he actually met. So very interesting stuff. If this is your first episode in, go back to the last 3 episodes. I break all that down there. Today, though, we're going to get into a few things that I've been building up to. One of these things is these Ramo-Men that exist in Malaita and in some of the other Solomon Islands, but specifically Malaita, and how that they're connected to the giant kind and how they could possibly be a DNA spliced version of human and giant DNA, but not like Jenny the quarter caste giant, where he was literally a quarter caste giant by blood, by sexual relations that his grandfather had with his grandmother. This is a whole different thing, where this is supposedly, in Boirayan's mind, a genetically spliced version of this giant kind and humankind together via these subterrestrials underneath the earth. At least this is part of his theorizing. And as we unearth some of the stories, you'll notice that they have giant traits, and the islanders say that they are derivatives from the giants who have been there for thousands of years. Also, we will tie it off with what Boirayan thinks is going on. I will, in conjunction, tell you what I think could be going on. And throughout this entire last episode, we'll be sprinkling in giants, we'll be sprinkling in UFOs, because it's going to all come together to a head. Finally, the 4th and final episode, we will get to the bottom of what Boirayan thinks is going on here. And again, I'll tell you what I think too, because again, I don't agree with everything Boirayan says. And like I've said throughout this series, we can only take his word on most of this stuff. Now, there are some things that are definable as far as history goes that he draws from, and I've done extra research on to match up with for sure, which I've done throughout the last 3 episodes. But generally, most of the things come from his mouth. Now, most of these people that have met him in these cryptid spaces have said that he's a very believable person. He's ex-military. He's got a reputable background, but that doesn't mean that he's not lying, right? That he could be paid by said organizations to put this information out there in a convoluted way to say, hey, here's this revelation, the method, we're going to give you this information, but we're also going to muddle it down with what we want you to believe that it is. So when it does actually come to fruition, we've already fed you the information the way we want you to see it. And I do see that side of it somewhat. And when I get to the end of this episode and I break down what he thinks is going on, there's some aspect to that, because his worldview is very different than my worldview. And as much as we agree on a lot of things, there are several main points that I don't agree with him in. And again, that doesn't mean that he's bought and paid for by the government. We could just have opposing worldviews, but we could still believe essentially the same thing at the bottom core, that there's something going on that's not right. So we'll get to that part towards the end, but I do want to set that premise out the gate. And we'll just, again, a little bit of backstory about who he is. He is also the research director of the Solomon Anthropological Expedition Trust Board Incorporated, and was one of the people involved in the investigation process on the islands regarding the true giants. And in this episode, I will talk about, he mentions the Nephilim several times in this book, which I thought was very interesting that he brought them up, and then to say that the Nephilim and these giants are not the same thing, which is interesting because his worldview is very much opposed to Christianity, to Islam, any kind of structured religion, at least in his mind, what he thinks structured religion is. But he is very spiritual, and he does believe in an all-encompassing being, but his idea of what these giants are and the juxtaposition of Nephilim, he thinks they both exist, but they're not the same thing. I have a little bit different view on that, but we will get to that towards the end when we start breaking down what he thinks is going on behind the scenes, what's manipulating these islands, and what could be working with these entities to bring us to what he likes to call the New World Order, a very classic word for what some people think is moving us towards the end of time. And he does say that. He uses verbiage like 666 and a lot of, honestly, religious verbiage as he's connecting it to what's going to happen in the end times. But again, I don't necessarily agree with all of it. And if you know anything about me, guys, I'm not a fear peddler. I'm not here to get people worked up and fearful because I don't think that's how we should be. But I do like to be informed and know what's coming down the pipe, right? And I think this book is very telling on some of the things that could happen in the future and some of the things that are going on these islands right now. So we're going to get into these Ramo-Men, but before we get into the Ramo-Men, there are a couple of things I want to talk about first. I want to talk about the Ramo-Giants, which are a completely different thing than the Ramo-Men. So these Ramo can be used to refer to two different things. You have these Ramo-Giants and you have these Ramo-Men. Now we're going to talk about the Ramo-Giants briefly and a couple stories involved with that. Then we're going to get into Boirayan, and two of the things that he was doing over there was he was searching for oil and he was searching for gems. Now, according to him, he was looking for these things to be able to get it back to the Australian government so he could connect the Solomon Island governments and the Australian governments so the Solomon Islanders could start making some money, because a lot of the Solomon Islanders, and he talks about it in the book, were living in poverty, and he wanted them to be able to build better lives for themselves, be able to have more revenue, because the Solomon Islands in general at the time when he was there, he said it was very corrupt. He said the governments were siphoning money off the people, and they didn't let the people know what was there that could help them generate revenue. Now, a lot of that's changed since 2010, which I've already talked about in some of the previous episodes, but according to Boirayan, he was trying to help them. And I will get into the gems specifically, a little bit about the oil, because it's important, because that ties into the back end of what he thinks is going on the Solomon Islands and what happened to him. Part of the reason why he left the Solomon Islands was because of the things that he was digging into, according to him. Obviously, we don't know. We're just listening to his account of this. So we've talked about Malaita and Malaitan culture a lot in these episodes. Now, Malaita has a very rich history with its giant race, or as the Malaitan people call them, the Ramo. The Ramo of Malaita are the same species of giants of Guadalcanal, but were in the Malaitan case reportedly culturally different to that of Guadalcanal. So just like the Malaitan Homo sapiens were different than the Guadalcanal Homo sapiens culturally, the same way the giant classes were too. They were very similar. Matter of fact, the Guadalcanal giants and Malaitan Ramo have their own written language. And he actually talks about how their language is on ancient stone walls and objects with inscriptions chiseled into them. So he breaks down how the language, not only the written language they had, but the spoken language they have, correlates directly to the Guadalcanal people or the Malaitan people in these different cultures. So he does it in a way that makes the most sense for the average person, and I like the way that he came across it. He said the Guadalcanal people's language and the Fijian language are very, very close. There are over 100 common words they share. He says, matter of fact, if a person from Guadalcanal goes to Fiji, they said within a week, they would learn the other language, and vice versa if someone from Fiji came to Guadalcanal, because the languages are so close. He says that the Guadalcanal Giants language and the Malaitan Ramo-Giants language are so similar to the people that live there that they're able to communicate with them in a very similar way, where they have a lot of the same dialect and a lot of the same words. However, it's still different. So when we're talking about the written language, it looks very different than what the people, the Homo sapiens on the island, write with. However, when they speak very similar. And this is important because when we talk about this one location of this mystical Ramo-Giant that he found the location of, there are all kind of writings and inscriptions on these stone tablets and on the spiraling walls that go up to this mountaintop where this Ramo-Giant is supposedly buried, this mythical spiritual giant that they talk about in their culture. Now, we were talking about how the giants on the islands are very similar to the Homo sapiens on the same islands that they're on. Well, this is very true on Malaita, because the Ramo-Giants on Malaita use similar weapons that the tribe's people on Malaita also use. They use what they call a subi or a supi, S-U-B-I or S-U-P-I. I've seen it spelled both ways. He spells it with a B. Online, when you look it up, you'll probably find the weaponry you're looking for when you type in S-U-P-I. He said the giant version is 10 to 15 foot diamond sharpened timber sword style weapon. And again, the Malaitan people or tribes people, the headhunters, or even just the regular tribes people that use it for battle or hunting, use these as well. They're just a lot smaller. However, when you go online and look at them, they're pretty big. But just imagine that triple, quadruple the size, a giant using this spear-ended club. That's basically what they look like. And if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, we are putting pictures up as I speak. So if you're listening on any other device, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, whatever, if you want to see what they look like, you can just go to YouTube or Rumble and you'll see it pop up while I'm talking. But this is more cultural connective tissue between the tribe's people on Malaita and these Ramo-Giants. Very similar to the Guadalcanal giants, these Ramo-Giants would do the same things. They operated the same way. As a matter of fact, and Marius Boirayan suggests this in the book, that all these cave systems, these underground tunnels, are all connected between the islands. So it wouldn't surprise me if, these Ramo-Giants were different than the Guadalcanal giants, but underground, they also were able to move between these islands. That doesn't mean to say that the giants, which you know from the story of Luddy Makoti, that they didn't fight each other. And we know that just from biblical stories. We know that from the book of Enoch. We know that from the book of Giants, where giants would war against each other. They didn't get along either. So they could have had these underground areas where their clans had specific areas underground as well as above ground as well. So don't put that out of the sphere of possibilities when we're talking about underground civilizations. It could operate very similar to it does above the earth. Say if you're in Europe and countries are butting up to each other and they don't get along, well, it could work very well the same way underneath the ground too. Yes, these Ramo-Giants operate very similar to the Guadalcanal giants, and they would storm the villages. They would kill dozens of men with one swipe with these subis. They would steal people, women, children, use them as food, use the women to procreate. They did all the same stuff. So they're coming from the same genealogy. They're coming from the same DNA pool. They just operate a little differently because they have a little bit different culture because they're on another island. Now, to this mystical location that Marius Boirayan hunts down, and it's important when I get into the gem part of the story, he uses the searching for gemstones, which he was actually doing, but he uses it as a cover to try to find this location where this giant Ramo was buried, this mythical giant that all of these Malaitan people revere, but they won't go near. It's like a no-go zone, no-fly zone if it was Area 51 pretty much amongst the Malaitan people. So Marius refers to these Ramo-Giants as a civilization, which he does refer to many different giant groups as civilizations, but specifically this one because of the hieroglyphs that are involved with this particular mythical giant. Now, he talks about it is a mountain near Mount Mala in North Malaita's interior. It is a perfectly fitting large stone wall spiraling around the mountain. This leads to a flat area on the top of the mountain where another large stone wall separates off a higher split-level flat area where a stone altar can be found. Further on is a burial site which has a perfect 18-foot by 6-foot by 1-foot stone upon it. The bush people who live further away from that area say that a Ramo of great importance is buried there. There's also hieroglyphic inscriptions chiseled into the stone wall. A decade ago or so, when some of the islanders were cutting back the jungle a little to expose this area more, they found pottery and other items. I would assume large pottery and large items because these were giants they were talking about. Now, he says, and he does this throughout the book, where he suggests that people go hunt this stuff down, but then he always throws in a caveat. Well, you might need a helicopter. Well, there might be government people there to stop you, but I encourage you to do it, which I always found hilarious that he's encouraging people to throw themselves into danger. He probably thinks there's a lot of people like me out there where we'll just throw caution to the wind and say, hey, cool, let me go try my hand at that. Which, honestly, after reading this book, I would love to try my hand at the Solomon Islands and see what's really going on there. So he actually gives coordinates to this location, which is also interesting to me. And he says that the remnants are at the coordinates 8 degrees, 41 minutes, 06.88 seconds south, 160 degrees, 45 minutes, 43.42 seconds east. And I'm going to throw up a picture here again that I showed in episode 2 of the map where he shows where the Ramo remains are at. It's very interesting. He knows where all these things are at. He puts it on a map. Again, he's showing the location. He's encouraging people to go there, but yet giving you a caveat of there's probably government agents going to stop you and you need a helicopter, which why give people the location if you want to give them the big no in the process? I don't know. He himself doesn't actually get to the mountain. Even though he gets close, there are some things that stop him from getting there, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But he knows where it's at. He gets close to it. He never actually goes to the location. This is all pulling from stories from different tribes people who are telling him about this mythical Ramo-Giant who was buried on the top of this mountain. Now, interestingly enough, the traditional landowners of where this mountain is located, they said that they had been cutting the jungle back, exposing the place in hope that some entity from the sky who originally owned it would see it. You know, they know about the dragon snakes. They know about the diamond snakes. They revere these things as some sort of spiritual significance, the gods. You know, you're going to hear this throughout eons of history about these beings coming down from the sky, giving people technology, giving people powers. You're gonna see this a lot. But they talk about this revered place as that. And he says, apparently in the early 1990s, somehow the ones guarding this secret place got the notion that it might have some Christian significance to it. And they had a small delegation from Israel come over to check it out. The people that came from Israel left saying that it had nothing to do with Christianity, but they wouldn't say what it was. And they wouldn't say what they found, and they wouldn't tell anybody, but they got up out of there. So that's interesting because the Malaitan people won't even go there. Even the people that owned the land there, they don't go there. It's off limits, but they invite other people to do it. They just won't go there. So these people from Israel go there and they're like, no, this isn't Christian at all. And we're out of here. I don't know what they went back to tell. I don't know what they saw or who they went back to tell what they saw. But it's very interesting that the traditional landowners invited these people to come over and they wouldn't even tell the landowners what they saw. Now, also, reportedly, in an area of Kauai in East Malaita, there is a large cemetery deep in the jungle with literally thousands of giant skeleton bones scattered upon the ground. It's not even known whether this was actually a Ramo cemetery or whether the locals over a few hundred years gathered them and placed them there because they weren't buried. It's just like a boneyard of giant bones. Also, there's a village not far away from this Ramo cemetery. One of the village hut's main support poles is a Ramo femur bone that measures nearly 8 feet in length. The locals estimate this particular Ramo to have been over 24 feet tall, which Marius said didn't surprise him because of all the folklore of giants being well over 25 feet tall, well over 20 feet tall on the upper end, which, man, that's wild to even think about. A femur bone being 8 feet in length that was supporting a hut. They just used it as a support post for a hut. That's wild, man. Now, we're going to get into this gem part of the story, which will move us into the Ramo-Men part of the story. And then obviously we're going to kick back the end piece where I give you what Marius Boirayan thinks is going on. And then I'll adversely tell you what I think's going on, which frankly, I agree with what a lot he's got to say, at least in theory, but there are some differences. And we'll get into that here in a minute. Now, how this part of the story starts with the gems, Marius wants to get to where this ancient mythical Ramo burial site's at. He's trying to find a way there to this particular portion of Malaita. He has a friend named Michael, and Michael's father, Festus, is an older man, and he can get him there, and he can move Marius under the guise of, hey, this white man's a friend of mine. We're doing work together, which, by the way, what Festus shows him in their first meeting together, they're able to concoct a plan. Now, when he goes to Festus, Festus pushes a small cardboard box in front of him. And when he opens it, it's hundreds of different translucent colored garnets, emeralds, sapphires, zirconiums, all kind of stones mixed in together. Takes them outside. He looks at them in the light. He said, these are legit. And Festus is like, yeah, they're all over the place. You could just walk down certain areas. They're just all over the ground. Rubies all over the ground. And he breaks down to Festus and some of the other men that are there that night when they're having a few beers. And he lets them know, like, listen, this could be life-changing for you if you could get this to people in the government, which Festus, by the way, worked for a part of the government in that city. So he's trying to push Festus. He's trying to push these men. They're a little apprehensive. He gets grilled by one of them too, a bunch of questions, which apparently I guess he passed with flying colors. So at the end of this, they're all about it, but Festus tells him that there's an area in Malaita which is close by this Ramo-Giant burial site that they can go meet the chief of the area. He will show them where all these stones are at. They'll let them take the stones. He said the children in the area are using the stones like you would a stone in a slingshot. They would throw these around like rocks over there in specific areas of Malaita and other parts of the Solomon Islands. Matter of fact, there are diamonds seen, black diamonds that are seen in some of these areas, which is mind-blowing. And part of the reason that Marius says that he wants to get this information is because he wants to gather enough stones, send it to his people in Australia, have them look at them, and if they're legit, then maybe they can help broker some sort of transaction, some sort of deal with the political structure in the Solomon Islands, which would boost the economy there. And according to Marius, that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to help these guys out. And he's a little selfish too because he wants to get to this giant burial site. He's all about giants, all about UFOs. He doesn't really care about the money part of it, or at least that's what he's telling us in the book. So before he gets ready to go on this trip with Festus, he meets another Malaitan friend who had been to the area where this gravesite was at, and he actually describes it specifically like he had heard before. He said perfectly fitting hand-carved stone block walls that spirals all the way up a mountain so they know it was made by something or somebody. It protected the upward path to the top of the mountain. On top of the mountain was a big stone table and a large sheet of flat stone on the ground nearby, beneath which the Ramo-Giant of importance was buried. The stone table he told him about seemed like it was some part of a ceremony or ritual, which got me thinking, because I know there is always some inverse of what the Nephilim do as opposed to what Yeshua does. And I've already talked about the stone rock being rolled in front of these cave graves for these giants, very similar to the way the stone was rolled in front of Yeshua's cave after he died. This is also very similar. It made me think of this stone table imagery, the altar imagery of the ancient Hebrews. And we can even take this to Joshua 4:5-7. And Joshua said to them, pass on before the ark of the Lord your God in the midst of the Jordan, and take up each of you a stone upon his shoulder, according to the number of the tribes of the people of Israel, that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time, what do those stones mean to you? And you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it passed over Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be the people of Israel a memorial forever. So the Israelites used these stones, these stone altars that they sacrificed animals on to God as a remembrance of the Jordan being dried up and then being able to go across it. We know Israel built altars. They would take uncut stones and stack them together to remind themselves of God's great faithfulness. As we get deeper into the Old Testament, it will soon feel like the landscape just gets dotted with these altars, and that's true, it does. You will see these altars throughout the Old Testament as symbolism of repentance. Now, I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia, which both were written by men who used Christian allegories, especially C.S. Lewis, throughout their books. If you know anything about C.S. Lewis and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, when Aslan, who is a symbol for Christ, is killed on the stone table. The stone table is symbolic of the cross of Jesus. And if you know anything, when he rises back from the dead, the table is broken. So I think that this stone altar, this stone table, which I think that this altar is up there that they did rituals on as a possible inversion of what Christ did for us on the cross and the repentance that is given through that. It's just a thought, and I thought that it made more sense to see that as a connective tissue after seeing the stone that is rolled in front of a lot of these giants who die in front of their graves. And even Marius says that there's some weird connection between it and Christianity, and he says that these giants have some sort of connectivity to the spiritual world that we don't quite understand. He talks about, and I've talked about this already on previous episodes, where these giants could psychically slow people down or scramble their minds when they're trying to chase them down or attack them. So when Festus takes Marius to this village where they're going to look at these gems, and he's going to try to, at least on his end, broker the deal between these tribes people or get them to want to work with the Australian government or any governments that would come there to try to mine these gems, he has to go there and get enough of these gems to send back to the Australian government so they can test it. First, he's got to convince them. So he brings this small pocketbook called The Rocks of the World, and it has a picture of all these different gems. He shows it to the tribes people and the chief. He's like, yeah, we got lots of these. So he shows them where they're at. Marius sees them. He's like, man, I'm walking down this path, and I just see the ground sparkling. The sun's hitting the ground. I just see red, blue, green all the way, and the kids are just kicking them like rocks. And he's just blown away with just how abundant they are on this island. And he tells the chief and the other chiefs of other tribes that come in and the people of the village, hey, listen, this could be good for you. And they don't quite understand it, but he does sell them on the fact that it will bring them revenue for things that they may want for their village, which they seem very open to it because they let him sift through 133,000 gems. He and his people, Festus, and the people that were brought with Festus, some of his sons also came, and they went through, I think it was about a 2-week process. They went through all these gems, 133,000. They ended up taking about 17. Now, that was Marius. He took 17,000, sent them back to Australia, which when he did and they checked them, they were blown away. They said, no, all these are legit. Where did you get them? And at this point, he's trying to broker the deal. And I'll get to that in a minute, what ends up happening with that. Now, the other part that Marius is trying to figure out is how come no governments have come here yet? He said, has there not been any geologists in the area that have seen these gems or written about these gems? Well, he talks to his stepfather, John, who I've talked about before. Now, John was working for the Ministry of Energy, Mines and Natural Resources as the head purchasing liaison officer, which gave Marius an advantage because he was able to ask him questions and get information. Now, when originally, and I will only talk about this briefly because it's a whole part of the story that doesn't really matter, is a connective part to these giants and these Ramo-Men, but he finds out earlier that there's crude oil just bubbling up all over the islands. And he goes to John and he actually finds paperwork of people who have come from other countries and done research on it. And he wonders why this has never been mined. This oil has never been used or taken out of there, or any deal's been brokered between countries to come get it. He suggests that the countries don't want to because they want to regulate what they want people to think is the amount of oil that is available in the world. And I don't know. It's a possibility. I mean, we know that they tell us there's X amount of fossil fuels on the earth, and there are a lot of conspiratorial rabbit holes to go down with that particular one, but that is an entirely separate episode. Maybe one day. I know I've talked about it on other podcasts about what could really be going on with the control of oil throughout the world. But he suggests that's why they don't go there, because they don't want to tap into this pretty much unlimited resource that's on the island. So he basically gives that up when he realizes that nobody's going to do anything about it. He tried to broker deals with the corrupt politicians in the Solomon Islands. He tried to broker deals in Australia. Nobody wants anything to do with it. So now he's trying his hand at gems. He's like, okay, maybe I can help him out with the whole gem thing. So he goes back to John. He gets access to the storeroom where he originally got the paperwork for all of the original research on the crude oil that was on the island. And he's like, there has to be some documents of some geologists that have been here, somebody. And he does. He finds a blue book with a gold embossed title, The Geology of the Solomon Islands, Part 1. And he realizes there has to be a Part 2, and he digs around, and he does find a Part 2 also laying around. He actually jacks them, throws them in a book bag, and takes them for use. I think he copies some stuff out of it, and he ends up giving it back to John to sneak back into the storeroom, which nobody cares what's going on in the storeroom, apparently. It's just old books. These politicians don't care. They're just, living corrupt lives and running these tribes people around and telling them whatever they want to. They're not actually trying to help them. But even when they went in to supposedly help these Solomon Islanders, there was a whole agenda behind it. It wasn't for the goodness of their hearts that, Australia's going to come in and help you. Like, no, it wasn't like that. And I do agree with him on that. I don't think that there wasn't an ulterior motive for why Australia in the early 2000s went to the Solomon Islands to quote unquote help. So when he's digging through these documents, Mr. Grofer pops up. Now, I talked about Mr. Grofer on episode 1. And this was from these documents when I talked about episode 1, but I bounced around a little bit there because we were just talking about reptilians, greys, UFOs, these diamond snakes, dragon snakes. So I did jump around the story a little bit, and we brought up Mr. Gopher because he did go back to England and let them know in the 1960s that there were these weird UFOs there. So the word had already gotten out that there was something weird going on the island, but he was a geologist, and he was there studying all of these gems, and he found a variety of colored garnets, zircon, topaz, and much more. And of even more particular interest, in these books that Marius found, Grofer's statement said there were indicators of every possibility of diamonds to be found, and there was need for further exploration to confirm this. But unfortunately, the exploration never occurred, mainly due to the British government withdrawing their geologist in 1962 after Grofer, or Grover, which I've talked about on episode 1, reported back to London about the UFOs he had witnessed on his field trip to Quarry in central East Malaita, and the Malaitans' reluctant attitude towards the white man and change, which that last piece I can totally understand. The UFO piece, I wonder how that went in 1962, because we know in 1947 was kind of the explosion of the UFO phenomena with what happened in Roswell. Not to say that's the only UFO incident. There were a lot of UFO incidences going on in late 1930s, all through the 1940s, 1950s, all the way up until now. But 1947 was very significant because it hit the mainstream and it lit people's curiosity up. So we're talking about 1962. So we're talking maybe 15 years later that this Mr. Grofer goes back to London and says, hey, there is a wealth of things over here. But they're like, no, because we don't want to deal with these hostile islanders. And we don't know what you just saw over there. We're not trying to deal with that, especially of all these reports that have come out. And you don't know what the governments really know about these things behind the scenes. They may have been told by somebody else not to do it because of whatever reasons. Now, it's even crazier. Back to Festus. He tells Festus about the Mr. Grofer. Festus has an old handwritten page which Mr. Grofer had given him 35 years prior. So he had actually met Mr. Grofer that named the gemstones he found in Quarry, Festus's homeland in central East Malaita. In the brief intelligent note, it was mentioned that no doubt diamonds, in particular black diamonds, could be found. As it turned out, Mr. Grofer was correct because they did find black diamonds among all kind of other gems on the island. So a couple of years later, after Marius gets these gems, he goes back to Australia with 17,000 of these Malaitan gemstones. He rents this apartment overlooking Moreton Bay near Brisbane, and he has his phone connected. He makes a point to talk about that. And having all the relevant Solomon Islands paperwork relating to the gemstones and the Solomon Islands oil and gas, he purchases a photocopier, phone, fax machine, and in his home office, he cuts loose faxing, phoning all corners of the world, seeking venture capital for Solomon Islands gemstones and the newly formed company Solomon Islands Oil and Gas, while spending a small fortune on the phone bill. And he does talk about how all this backfired on him because he gets bullied and badgered by some government agents while he's back in the Solomon Islands because, you know, he came to Australia to bring these gems there. He does some faxing, phoning. He's trying to get this deal brokered. But when he goes back, he does find a hard time with making that happen because there are people in power that don't want this to happen, which is weird because now a lot of that's happening. But at the time, he was told to stop. So basically, it wasn't time yet. And what else was going on the island that they didn't want people in certain areas? And he suggests that there are or have been all kind of government entities from different parts of the world that are there in conjunction with these subterrestrial entities. And they don't want people knowing about that because it's one thing for the islanders to see this stuff, right? They've seen these dragon snakes, these diamond snakes, these greys, these reptilians, these giants. That's a part of their life. That's what they've known for thousands of years. But you start bringing people in from the outside and they start seeing these things and they're just there to mine gold or mine for gems or mine for oil. And they see this, word's going to get out and it's not going to be controllable. So it has to be controllable. And again, back to Marius was bullied and badgered. Several months later, when he gets back to the Solomon Islands, when the Australian Solomon Islands white federal secret police abducted him from the streets of Honiara before the current occupation, they kidnapped him and sent him back to Australia, and only with what he was wearing. So after that, he was like, I got nothing to do with this anymore. I'm not going to try to broker a deal to help these people. And he felt, and I'm just saying this from just base level, I'm just saying, hey, if I believe everything he's saying in this book, He's trying to help these people because he felt a connectivity to them. He married into their culture. They considered him one of them. He was allowed to go all these places where white men generally aren't able to go, and he wanted to help them. And I'm just going to say, from just a base level, him trying to help got him in trouble. It did. We know that he was followed by these shady police officers. All these pictures of all these giant footprints, giant bones, all these things were stolen from him, according to him. So, yeah, he probably didn't want to go any further with this. He's got a kid. He's got a wife or wives, and he doesn't want to die. And he's been in the military. He probably knew a little bit better than other people about what was really going on. And I think there's a piece of it that if we want to speculate, maybe there were some things he was involved with that he's not telling us in the story that also caused some of this stuff to happen as well. Maybe he went off the rails. Maybe he was sent there to do a mission, and he, halfway through it, decided he didn't want to do it. We don't know. Now, we're going to get to these Ramo-Men, but we're going to talk a little bit about the Ramo-Giants as we blend in towards it, because they have some very similar characteristics. So the name Ramo is used by the people of Malaita to describe two different types of hominids that once cannibalized their people. Ramo is a Malaitan translation for man with spiritual powers who eats men, or man who eats man. Another name that's used particularly by the Kwayo people for the tall, hairy Ramo-Giants is the world Ramo, which, well, that sounds like something, like a world breaker, man. I don't know if I want to see one of these. Well, I do. One of these 24-foot Ramo-Giants stomping through the woods. I look at it like this. What a way to die. What I don't want to do, and I was joking with my buddy Justin from Cryptids of the Corn and my buddy Ward from Merkle Media, and we got a project that we're working on. And I joked about a certain area that we might be in, and there's all these weird cliffs that drop off into the water. There's all these pitfalls. And I joked, I said, man, I would much rather see a portal open up and jump in it, knowing I might not ever be seen again and go out that way, than trip and fall over a cliff and die. It just seems a lot lamer. Like, I don't know if I'd want to do that. So that's just a little side note there. So that first kind of Ramo, the Ramo-Giant, this is in Malaita, is a big, hairy 15-foot tall type, but we know they go up to, the 20s. And they say those still exist in large numbers in the jungle mountains of Guadalcanal, Isabel, and all other parts of the Solomon Islands, including Malaita. And Marius also says that he believes that these Ramo are allied with the unknown subterranean civilizations found under these islands, which I completely agree with. They might not work for them. They might have been there longer than these, or if they've been around the same amount of time, maybe they coexist together. I'm not really sold on the fact that these subterrestrial entities are quote unquote fallen angels. They might be some sort of derivative and experimentation of them, especially if we're talking about grays. I mean, I'm not saying that fallen angels can't shapeshift into anything and show themselves a certain way, which I think they do. But if we're just talking about flesh and blood, grays, reptilians, I think they're their own thing. So they've coexisted with these giants. I don't know if they're necessarily symbiotic in the way that one created the other or one's telling the other what to do, but maybe they're just more symbiotic in the sense they're working together for maybe a similar goal, or they're just coexisting and saying, listen, you do this, we do this, we'll leave each other alone. And I think that might be more of what I think, and I believe that was what Marius is suggesting here too. Now, the second type of Ramo, and this is the one we're going to get into, is the Ramo-Men, is a Homo sapien with some kind of genetic throwback to the huge Ramo-Giants of old, but are not the same as the half-caste human giants of Guadalcanal that can be found on that island and on other islands of Melanesia. So what he's trying to say is they have all of these traits like Ramo-Giants, but they're not from the Ramo-Giants. It's not like Jenny, who was the quarter caste, who was directly from the giant bloodline. No, he suggests that these are genetically modified humans who have these giant traits, or as I might like to say, these Nephilim traits, which I think that that's where the eventual Nephilim of the future will come from. I think that the experimentation going on behind the scenes, if you believe that that's going on, that this Superman, this Ubermensch, as they would say in Germany, is being genetically modified behind the scenes. So when it comes to fruition, when it has been completed, which if you do believe that there is going to be some sort of Antichrist in the future, I believe that it would be a derivative of something like that. It will look very human. They don't look much different than the average person outside of maybe being a little taller, may or may not have 6 fingers. I don't know if that's going to be showcased in that way, but the abilities that these Nephilim will be able to do would be far superior than the average human. Just think like Captain America or Winter Soldier, somebody that's given this super serum, I think in that way. And this is what he is saying that these Ramo-Men are. They are cannibals. They're super intelligent, super fast, super strong. Whole tribes of hunters will go out after these Ramo-Men and nobody will come back. Or if anybody does, everybody else got killed. And they've only got a story to tell about how they were somehow able to get away from these guys. Now, I'm going to get into a couple of stories about these Ramo-Men. But before I want to do that, I'm going to give you a mainstream definition for Ramo. They are talked about in the mainstream, just so you know, but they give it a little different spin. There's no supernatural aspect to it, but they do speak of them as fierce warriors. So a Ramo was a warrior leader among certain tribes on Malaita in the Solomon Islands. A Ramo was recognized when he had killed an adversary in personal combat and established an intimidating reputation. This was also believed to represent ancestral support, and their supernatural abilities contributed to their reputation. So even the mainstream talks about that they had some sort of supernatural abilities according to lore. Not that the mainstream is suggesting that these supernatural abilities actually exist. They're just saying they were such fierce warriors that the people around them believed that they had supernatural abilities. Maybe they're right. Maybe that's all they were just fierce warriors. They were the best in their tribe, and they became known as the Ramo. But according to these tribes in Malaita, these Ramo-Men did not operate like regular people. They needed to eat human flesh. When they turned 16 years old, it was said that there's a switch that turned on in them, that they became these Ramo-Men. It was like something inside of them in their DNA got switched on at a certain time that all of a sudden they wanted to eat human flesh. It fed their supernatural abilities. It's wild stuff. And if we want to go down the route of believing that there are giants, that believing there are some sort of subterrestrials, extraterrestrials, interdimensional entities, wherever you want to go, if you're one of those people like me who theorize on those things, who believe that those things exist in some format, then we have to think that this is also a possibility that these Ramo-Men could be a supernatural hybridized version of these giants. So modern Malaitans generalize that Ramos were part of the leadership triumvirate for each clan, along with a priest and a feast giver. In practice, sometimes a single person fulfilled more than one role. Not all clans had established Ramos or feast givers, which Marius talks about. The Ramos weren't in every tribe. However, some tribes had multiple Ramos, and we'll get to a couple stories here in a minute about that, which is mind-blowing. In theory, Ramos led the group in war and blood feuding, avenging murder or a violation of the sex code for bounty. Their prestige and wealth depended on their ability to collect and redistribute blood money. A Ramo usually had blood money offered against him, but he was able to successfully intimidate anyone from attempting to collect it. They may even kill their own relatives in order to collect money put up for their own death. So we'll talk about one of these stories in a minute. They were so insane that family members would put out bounties on their own children's head or their own family member's head because they were so insane. They would eat their own. They did whatever they wanted. Some of these Ramo were just wild men in the woods that lived in caves and would just hunt, but they could operate like the average tribes person. They could talk, walk, act, very normal. Marius talks about how cunning and smart and intelligent they were. They weren't wild savages. They may have operated in some ways very savage-like, but externally they could put up a facade of being very normal, which, if you're an upper tier serial killer, some of those guys, Ted Bundy, could put up a facade. These guys were like that. These Ramo were like that. But they also had, according to the tribes people, supernatural abilities. So I don't know how you're stopping that. And some of these Ramo would fight each other. They want to know who's the strongest Ramo. That's even wilder. So we're going to get to a couple of cool stories about these Ramo-Men that Marius Boirayan came across when he was talking to some tribes people in Malaita. Now, Marius had gotten hurt on a dirt bike motorcycle accident on the road, and he had busted up his back. So he's laid up for a bit, and he was in Gunabusu, which is a small town of about 400 people. And while he's there, he's talking to some of these Malaitan people, and they start telling him about these Ramo-Men, and they tell him a couple stories that are pretty wild. So we're going to tell the story of Ramo-Giant. So Giant was born at Mount Irigi in the interior of Cuyo approximately 150 years ago and lived as an only child with his mother and father in their leaf house in the jungle mountain ranges. So I told you before, 16 years old, 15 years old. This is when these genes start kicking in. So when he was 15, his genes kicked in. He started to turn into what the people of Cuyo know as a Ramo, man who eats man. So around 15, around 16, these puberty years, these recessive genes, these throwback genes kick in, and it gives them this man-eating psychopathic killer instinct, just like the Ramo-Giants of Malaita. So this is that DNA splicing that Marius thinks has been going on underneath the cave systems with these subterrestrial entities that they are basically using the islanders as experiments, which makes sense. They're stealing the islanders left and right. We know about these diamond snakes, these dragon snakes, these UFOs, capturing people, them disappearing. Why wouldn't there be some sort of experimentation going on underground? It just makes sense. If we're going to go there, guys, we're going to go all the way there. That's probably happening too, right? You don't believe any of this? That's cool. I understand. But if you're giving any bit of what's said to be going on the Solomon Islands any validity, you got to throw this in there too, right? We're going to go all out, man. If we're talking reptilians, we're going to talk about men being spliced with giant DNA and creating these Ramo-Men. So these genes are kicking in for Giant, and he asks his father, can he go down to the river to do some fishing? So his father tells him, you need to be careful because there are men out there that will try to harm you. You're still a kid. This isn't a safe area. It's never safe. There's Ramo everywhere. There's just the average person trying to get over on a kid. So he goes down there. He inevitably does run into three men. They're not Ramo, but they're regular men, but it's three of them. And they basically capture him. Now, he's already caught a bunch of fish at this point. So they're going to kill Giant, and he said, look, I've got a pig. Let me go get the pig, and I'll bring it back to you. You can have all the fish now. Just let me go get the pig, and I'll bring it back to you. He's like, cool. They let him do it. I don't really know why they let him do it. Maybe they just wanted the pig. Maybe they were cool with the fish in the first place, but they let him go. And maybe they thought, too, hey, this isn't a big area. We'll probably find you again. So we know you come fish here, so we just come back and get you at another time. Again, it's just part of the story. So Giant does not go and get a pig. He actually crawls up the side of this mountain and acts like he's going to get it, but then sneaks back down the mountain, takes out bow and arrow, shoots all of them in the head, takes out his knife, cuts all their heads off, and then comes back to his father with all three of these heads hanging from a sapling that he cut off. So basically like a big stick. He put these three heads on and showed his father. Now his father starts freaking out. He said, well, what if the village that these men were a part of, what if they find out? They'll come kill us. So Giant, with his giant genes kicking in, his cannibalistic psycho genes kicking in, these supernatural genes, he tells his father, listen, I'll get out of here. Tells his mother, I'll get out of here. I'm not going to bring the heat on the family I'm old enough. I'll leave. And then you guys don't have to worry about it. So they all agree that that is the way to go. So during Quay Wayne's travels, he comes across a big cave that the Quayo people call Ramo-Men. And Marius suggests that you can actually go to this cave. He knows of it. People can tell you how to get there. He says it exists. This is where this Ramo-Man Quay Wayne lived. Now, Quay Wayne goes on an absolute tear forever. He cannibalized people from South Malaita, Quayo, Quarry, and North Malaita also. He literally traveled the whole length of the island looking for his next meals. So as the years go by, people in the villages found out that he was in the area. They would send out hunting parties to try and kill him. They would never return. He was so powerful and cunning that no one could overcome him. He had his subi, axe, bow, and arrow, and he would slay them as often as he could. He actually encouraged these hunting parties to come after him because he would have more meat. He could take down a dozen at a time. Now, if you don't believe in the supernatural, I need you to explain a little bit, right? Here's this one person taking out giant hunting parties, if we believe the story, right? I lend to there being something supernatural there. Even if he's not some sort of Nephilim hybrid, something's going on. Because maybe he's taking out 12 to 20 guys at a time by himself. Maybe he's that good. You know, I'm sure there's some guys in special ops that we don't know about that can perform feats like this. But we're talking about on a regular basis for years. And he's encouraging it. He's on a whole demon time, literally, with these people. So late one afternoon, Ramo Quay Wayne was hunting humans in Quarry. And while he was stalking potential meals, he meets another Ramo named Lakeway. And he was a Ramo from Quarry. Now, they instantly recognized each other's power, which I thought that was very telling in the story. They knew that each other had some sort of supernatural abilities. They could sense it on each other. So they start talking to each other. So Lakeway asks Quay Wayne what he's doing. He's like, I'm just wandering around a bit. He doesn't even tell him I'm looking for food. He just says, I'm wandering around. He's like, well, why don't you come back to my place and stay? So, okay, that sounds fine. He's like, Quayo, where he lived, it's a long way away and it's nighttime. So he goes back there and he says, I'm hungry. Quay Wayne tells Lakeway that. And Lakeway says, hold on, I'll go get something. He comes back with a huge pig and kills it. Quay Wayne is not happy. He said, I only eat men every day of my life. I don't eat this junk. I don't eat this crap. You ain't bringing a man back. You're supposed to be a Ramo. You didn't go out and kill a man and bring him back. I'm your guest. So he eats the pig anyway. And he's like, look, come to my place in a couple of days and I'll show you what it is. So Lakeway comes to Quay Wayne's cave and he asks him, do you have any food? He's like, hold on, I'll go get some food. And he comes back with a whole man and they eat it. And as they're eating, Quay Wayne shows Lakeway all the skulls of the men he'd killed for food, which were hundreds. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of these skulls and bones that he's got in this cave, which again, I don't know, man. You can say it's not supernatural. That's a lot. If it's not, boy, that guy is something serious then. Now, both of them don't get any sleep that night. And Lakeway tells Quay Wayne, because you are from Quayo and I'm from Quarry, I would like to find out who has the most power. Quay Wayne just flexes on him. He says, I've already killed hundreds of men, a lot of them being Ramo themselves. And he holds up a big stone up above him and said, all the spirits of the dead men I have killed have now gone into this stone. Marius said that the same stone is kept at a sacred place called guise, which is about 1 mile away from Senegaloo Harbor. The story of Ramo Quay Wayne is a part of Quayo history, and they believe that the strength and spirit of Quay Wayne is still there anytime a man wants to use it for killing another man. So this stone that he said holds all the spirits of the dead men that he uses basically to power up is in this stone. That's in Gausap. Check this out, this story. In 2004, an Australian Seventh-day Adventist man, through a voluntary work scheme, had only just arrived at the hospital in Quayo, was beheaded from behind whilst doing some carpentry work. The story was the spirit of Quay Wayne had possessed the killer because he was around the stone and made this man commit the murder in some kind of payback for what the white man of the past had done to the Quayo people, which there may have been some awful white men that were on the island and did some things, and it jacked him up. He could have just done it on his own, but the story was that this evil presence from this stone that was in the village attached itself to this man, and he went and killed this Seventh-day Adventist man who was doing carpentry work at the hospital. I just thought that was an interesting story about Quawain and the interaction between him and another Ramo and how that they viewed each other. They obviously had some sort of respect for each other. I know not all Ramo do, but they obviously had some sort of respect for each other. But Quawain basically flexed on him and said, look at all these bones. Do you want to be one of these bones? You brought a pig when I came over there. I brought you a man. I'm a man bringing you a man. No diddy. But I thought that story was really cool, really interesting. And we're going to jump to the second Ramo-Man story. So the second story is the story of Ramo Balabata. And it starts with the early life of Balabata according to the people of East Cuello and Cuello Fundunga. So one day, Balabata, his father and mother, they're all sitting around their leaf house, and a messenger comes with news from one of Balabata's uncles, and they ask his mother to come to the village for the opening of the yam ceremony. So they do this ceremony to remove the tamboo from the yams before they are allowed to eat it, because it's forbidden to eat ripened yam because there are spirits inside of them. So they have to do this whole ceremony. They have to remove this tambo, these evil spirits. And once they do that, then they can take the yams back with them. They can eat them. So Balabata hears it and he tells his father, hey, can I go with Mom? I want to go into the village. His father says, no, because your uncles will, to break it down for you, turn him into a Ramo. They will invite a spirit into him because some of them are Ramo. And he doesn't want his son to turn into one of these Ramo-Men, one of these half Nephilim hybrids, which begs the question, is it a spirit that attaches himself to the person that makes them have supernatural abilities, or do they already have the gene inside of them and then whatever ritual they do unlocks it? And I think it could be both. I don't know the answer to that. I just know in this particular story that his father does not want him to go there because they will perform a ritual which will unlock whatever it is inside of him. He disobeys his dad. He decides to follow his mom. He grabs his Subi and he catches up with her, but she doesn't see him. And just like his dad predicts, the uncles perform sorcery and witchcraft upon him, placing the devil or evil spirit within him that would make him kill people or become a Ramo. Next morning, by then, his mom's figured out he's there, calls him out. He basically walks in silence back to his mother. So he's not answering his mother. He's not answering his father. And for 2 days, he refuses to sleep until daybreak, even though his father keeps trying to get him to go to sleep. So he schemes when his father and mother goes to the garden, he's going to go and kill all the pigs. So when they leave, he kills all of them but one. And this will tell you how smart these Ramo are or how cunning they are. He takes the one live one and carries it to a village where some other Ramo live. So he's going for like top pickings. He's going against these Ramo. This is a young, just now coming to his own Ramo. He goes to these villages where there are a lot of Ramo. He says, hey, I'm going to kill this pig for everyone to eat. They're all excited. He feasts with them. He stays up with them all night telling them stories until the sun comes up. So the next morning, the other Ramo tried to get him to go to this garden with them so they could pick vegetables. He says, oh, he's not feeling well. So when all the Ramo leave, he slaughters everybody in the village, 30 men, women, and children, and leaves no one alive. And he's 16 years old at the time. After the slaughter, he carries one of the dead men to another village where there's other Ramo. He's like, hey, I brought some meat. Y'all want to eat? Pulls the same trick off. So by midnight, everybody's asleep again. He takes out his Subi and blocks the entrance of the house and slaughters everybody inside, killing 50 more. Again, pulls it off. After the massacre, he grabs another one of the lifeless men and in the dead of the night carried him to another village, arriving in the morning. Now, he's got friends and relations there. So they're all happy to see him. He's bringing meat to them. They're all happy. They're going to eat human flesh. So after he feeds them, he starts lying to them. He tells them that his father died, and they know who his father is, but they haven't seen him in a long time, so they believe him. And he tells them that he's got to go home and he needs to take care of business since his father died. But instead of going home, he decides to hide in the jungle near the village feast. That afternoon and night, as different groups left the feast, Balabata killed everyone that came past him. Dozens of people were killed during the night. The only ones that were spared were those who traveled home in a different direction. Again, he's only 16 years old and he is like Pete Ramo. So Balabata ends up living in the jungle, very similar to the story of Quaywayne, and they send out massive hunting parties to take him out. Matter of fact, his father sends out massive hunting parties to take him out. He wipes the floor with all of them the rest of his life, and nobody knows how he died. All they know, according to the lore, is he was a vicious Ramo that killed hundreds and hundreds of people in Cuello. Another wild story about what these Ramo-Men were capable of. And that's what Marius really starts suggesting, that they have the traits of these giants. They have a lust for blood. It kicks in at a certain point. They superhuman strength, superhuman speed, superhuman intelligence. He believes they are some sort of genetically modified version of the giants. They're just not in size a giant, but they have giant abilities, which again goes back to my theory that the Nephilim in the future that are revealed will not look anything like the Nephilim of old. However, we could theorize that the Nephilim of old, those size giants could show up as well. I just think the evolution of man that they'll show us will be in the format of this godlike way that we can evolve ourselves. And I think this is possibly what this experimentation was being done on Malaita. Now we're going to get to the final piece about what Marius Boirayan thinks is going on there. And I'll tell you what I think could possibly be going on there, what I think about his story. And this will end the final chapter of Secrets of the Solomon Islands, which I've had an absolute blast with you guys. So, you know, from before, he talks about these UFO entrances. Now, according to him, these UFO entrances now are guarded by Australian forces, U.S. forces, possibly Japanese forces. They're all working in conjunction with whatever entities are in the subterrestrial regions of the islands. And not that they might be guarding the entrances per se, like right there, but they're guarding the areas they're in. And they said they're basically a no-go zone. Now, how did this happen? How did it come to be that these military forces decided to go there after for so long not actually being there? Now, we did talk about the Japanese during World War II, how that first group could have ran into some reptilians, could have ran into some giants in the middle of the jungle. That's why when the U.S. forces showed up, when the Allied forces showed up, they weren't there. The first group, we obviously know that they battled on these islands, but that first group was not there. They disappeared. So it's possible the Japanese at that point in time knew, well, there's some weird stuff going on here. And it's very possible that the Allied forces ran into some things while they were there too. Maybe that's when the wheels started turning with these different countries about what was actually going on there. We know that the prime ministers, the premiers in the Solomon Islands obviously know what's going on behind the scenes. It's said by Marius that some of them brokered some deals with these other countries to get access to these entrances, to get access to these giants, to these subterrestrial entities. And this was a part of helping pump revenue, at least into the pockets of these politicians, these corrupt politicians who are not trying to help the people in the Solomon Islands at all. We also know the story of Mr. Grofer, how he went back to the British in 1962 and let them know about UFOs. So we know there was some word getting out to the outside world about these UFOs. Also the story in 1961, the guy who said he's from NASA gets pointed in the direction of where one of these UFO entrances were at, goes away for a week or two, comes back, everybody sees him, he doesn't tell them anything and leaves. So clearly he got some sort of information or something when he left there. So at least for 40 years leading up to the Australian quote unquote help, or as I like to say in the Solomon Islands, Operation Help 'em Friend, when the Australian forces, right after 9/11, right during the War on Terror, they decide to go in and help the Solomon Islanders. Now, here's the best part, right? So at the time, John Winston Howard, who was an Australian former politician who served as the 25th Prime Minister of Australia from 1996 to 2007, he held office as the leader of the Liberal Party of Australia and was the Member of Parliament for the New South Wales division of Benny Long from 1974 to 2007. He was also a really tight friend to George W. Bush, who was president in the early 2000s. At the same time, John Winston Howard was the prime minister of Australia, but they were friends from the early 1990s. So this is an entire setup of why that John Winston Howard decides to go into these Solomon Islands. And it gets better. In 2003, in July, The Bulletin was a former Australian news magazine, ran an article about the Solomon Islands, which talked about the confusion amongst Aussie journalists as to why Mr. Howard, after only a few weeks arriving back to Australia from visiting George W. Bush in America, told the world he'd be invading the Solomon Islands the next month. And he intended to stay there for 10 years at the cost of 300 million Australian taxpayer dollars. It gets better. Early January in the year, the consensus in Australia was that sending Australian troops to occupy the Solomon Islands would be folly in its extreme. So, according to John Winston Howard, the Prime Minister of Australia at the time, according to the people that worked for him, they said it wasn't a good idea. Then all of a sudden, John Winston Howard goes and sees George W. Bush. This is after 9/11. This is when the war on terror is starting to crank up. He comes back from there and he's like, we're going to the Solomon Islands. We're going to invade there. We need to help these people out from themselves, basically. Now, I told you about the ethnic wars that were going on over there. We talked about how Lady McCody had talked to an Anglican bishop over the issue that was going on there. So that part of it was used as a cover for why John Winston Howard wanted to go into the Solomon Islands. What was the real purpose? And I want to suggest this. Very similarly to George W. Bush in his idea of the war on terror, there are a lot of theories that have been suggested that the real reason that George W. Bush wanted to get into the Middle East was not for oil, but was for ancient technology. Is this similar to why John Winston Howard wanted to go into the Solomon Islands after talking to George W. Bush to send these troops into these areas to lock down these high strangeness areas, to get in contact with these beings, to find out what this technology is? Now, Marius suggests that George W. Bush, John Winston Howard, they don't know the real reason. They are the puppets to the puppet masters above them that are telling them to do this, but they don't really know what the reasons are for their doing it. That part I don't know, guys. Maybe they do actually know. I know most people would suggest that they did. I don't know. Sometimes I don't think those guys in those positions care. I just think they care more about living a full life in the worst way. I think that they're willing to do whatever for power, but I don't know if they necessarily manipulate the power like that. That's where Marius and I differ a little bit. But regardless, he sends all these troops in. So Howard tells them that they're going to invade the Solomon Islands. He goes back to America, meets with George W. Bush, comes back again, and then makes it happen within weeks of when he gets back. So they're moving quick at this point. To Marius's point, it makes sense. What are you really going there for? Are you really going to help them from some ethnic war? Are you really trying to get rid of the evil that's on the island? I don't think so. Now, you could say they were going there for oil. We know there's a lot of oil there. We know there's a lot of gems there too. But they knew that before. They already knew. Was there something else that happened behind the scenes that made them go there that was more in the supernatural realm? And I have to suggest that because of all the theories that were swirling around George W. Bush and even his father about why they really wanted to go into the Middle East, what they really wanted to obtain in Iraq, what they really wanted to obtain in Afghanistan, these places where there has said to have been ancient technology, Nephilim technology. I'm just throwing that out there. Now, here's John Winston Howard, who is best friends with George W. Bush from the 90s, before they were even in these positions. That he goes and meets with him twice, and all of a sudden he's running up in the Solomon Islands. A little shady. That's all I'm going to say. I can't give you the exact reason why, but Marius is speculating, and I would say that I could see his point. And then side note, not only the reason to go there to get in contact with these entities, to get this technology, maybe even work side by side with these entities, which we know from tons of abductee accounts that there are humans working side by side with these greys, these reptilians, and whatever else is going on in these underground facilities. Nephilim, we've heard the gambit of beings that are under the ground that are working side by side with humans who work for different governments. So if they weren't already working with them, they went there to try to lock something down. That's a possibility. But not only that, though, they went there to stifle any economic development with that country. They want to keep them poor. We don't want them selling gems. We don't want them selling oil. We don't want them to build an economy. More people they can control by not having money to give them what they need to provide their families with sustenance or housing or growth, they'll do. And the best part is John Howard, he turned a blind eye to the ethnic war for years. It was going on long before he decided to step in. So then all of a sudden in 2003, he's like, hey, you know what? After what happened in the United States, in New York, well, I'm going to jump right in with $3 billion of Australian taxpayers' money. That was the total, what ended up costing the Australians. But now he wants to help the ethnic wars, right? Again, things don't add up. I'm not saying I know the answer. I'm just saying it doesn't add up. We have to look at that. Now, in 2003, this is when Marius dropped that website, the one that no longer exists. And I know I've had several people reach out to me and say that it exists on the Wayback Machine, but it's not the same website, not the original website. This is a website that was created when he dropped the book, and it's different. It doesn't have all the same information from this 2003 website. Just to throw that out there to people, and I appreciate people reaching out to me and say, hey, I think I found this. And there wasn't any bad information of what they sent me, but it wasn't the original website with all the original pictures. But in 2003 is when all of this information started coming out about these UFOs, these giants on this island. And as the Americans instructed, the Howard military invasion and occupation of Solomon's Islands proceeded. Matter of fact, they sped up. The more information they got out there, they kept moving. Well, we got to get this on lockdown. We don't want people coming in here and seeing what's going on from the outside. Makes sense, if that's the case. Now, he suggests underground that all of these UFOs, these vehicles, are not only these subterrestrials. He thinks because there are different ones that have been seen since the Australians occupied the Solomon Islands over the years. They have these stingray type that are coming out now. He thinks some of those are man-made with this subterrestrial entity technology. And he thinks they're experimenting with these subterrestrial entities underground, doing all kind of things. So Marius suggests that humanity has been deceived by an organized design in connection with these entities, the organizations of the New World Order. And he does specifically say the New World Order, the NWO. When it comes to these undiscovered subterranean civilizations from millennia ago to the present day. Now, he says this applies to some of the giant hominoid species. Some of these Hades-dwelling subterranean extraterrestrial species are what the Christian Bible mythologically refers to as the devil and his angels. So again, he thinks that the Bible, he thinks that Islam, he thinks all of these religious texts are just mythology, that they don't exist. I find it fascinating when people say that it's a lie, that these are books that are lies outright, but yet they will suggest the wildest theories. You got to be okay with at least saying, well, maybe it's a possibility. Like, if you don't think any of it exists, like none of this crazy world exists, I get it. But if you start saying like all this wild stuff, it's like the witch that'll say that God doesn't exist, but demons exist. Or it's just a weird juxtaposition. I don't understand the non-connectivity there. I think it's just people that don't want that accountability. Like, you have to account for your actions. So if you suggest that there is a God who you have to be accountable to, well, then you have to look at yourself and try to grow and try to do better. And some people don't want to do that. And I can understand. I've been there. I'm not here to judge anybody, and everybody's at different points in their lives too. And I'm still massively growing as a human being. And, you know, to Marius's point, he has seen a lot of evil on the island when it came to the churches, when it came to Christianity, when it came to Islam, the Catholic Church. He talks about all that. He talks about how these organized religions are there to control people. I understand where he's coming from. I just don't agree with his worldview here that it's mythology. I think that they're one and the same. I think what he's talking about is exactly what I'm talking about. I think ancient astronaut theorists are not wrong. I think the format that they're talking about is right. I just think it's a bigger scope than what they see it. They see it as these beings evolving into something that helped us evolve, when I don't think that's the case. And I do think there's an overarching Yahweh or God that created it all. And I think there are warring factions behind the scenes. But I also believe that as people, we don't need to fear that. We don't need to live in that fear and fearmonger to other people to help them fear either. That's not why I do this podcast. I do this to share information for us to grow, have a good time at the same time, laugh, but also look at some of these crazy things like, hey, there could be a possibility here. He even touches on the one world government and the reptoids, the half-human reptilians that are semi-allied with this one world government that live underground. So he's already talked about the reptilians. He's probably at least heard of David Icke at this point, and he's probably agreeing like, well, maybe there's some of what David Icke's saying that's true, and maybe these reptilians that have been heard and seen to be on these islands are a part of this overarching control that's going on globally. And I think it's a possibility. I think they're all part of the same sphere. I don't know if they're all connected per se in the sense of they all work together like that. I think it's very much like what you would consider the elites or the New World Order. They're just a bunch of gangs that have a central goal, but they might not all like each other either. Kind of like the Giants. Maybe they don't necessarily like these Greys. Maybe they work together because they have a symbiotic relationship. Doesn't mean that they don't go after each other from time to time either. Now, Marius talks about these UFOs and these Greys as not being good at all. He says, matter of fact, people that say they're good, he's like, they haven't been in Solomon Islands. They haven't listened to these stories around the world where nothing really good comes out of them. And he said that they are working on dirty deals with the governments behind the scenes. Now, this is where he and I differ, but are kind of the same. He says that these subterranean extraterrestrials or subterrestrials or interdimensional beings, that they are enemies of a species that genetically made and keeps an eye on Homo sapien man, the one that Christians and Muslims mistakenly call God. In the Bible or Quran, let alone other religious texts, the one they call God comes from heaven, and those mistaken, fanatical, mythological believers normally point to the sky for that one. He's saying, and he's clearly an ancient astronaut theorist, that these good entities created man, and they war with these bad extraterrestrials. And he does suggest they're from space. So if you're not a glober and believe in space, then maybe take yourself out of this part of it. I don't know what to tell you, but this is where Marius is coming from. Like, he's right there. Like, God doesn't exist, but this exists, but they're just like God. And you're kind of saying the same thing, but yet you're not. And you're making it to where there's no accountability for your actions for yourself. And I think that's that weird way of pushing it off from yourself and making it to where anything goes with what you do in life, outside of maybe some sort of moral compass that you've built for yourself, which, again, we're all in different places in life and we're all just trying to figure it out. And I think fundamentally, that's where Marius Boirayan and I differ. Just the worldview. I think that his thoughts on what's going on there, if these things are actually happening, are very similar to what I think is going on underground, what I think is going on in the government behind the scenes. All of these theories that he's talking about, I think, align very closely to what I think. But at the same time, we differ in the aspect of a loving God who created us, who's more powerful than these negative entities. If you ever hear an ancient astronaut theorist or someone who believes in the Anunnaki as being the ones who created us, they're warring, but neither side is more powerful than the other. There's not a winner, really. It's, I hope our side wins. That's generally what you hear. And I think that's where that accountability piece comes in, that I know in my heart that there's a God that is bigger than all that. And that's why I don't fear what's coming down the pipe. We may get worried from time to time. We may see some things that bother us, but I don't think we need to fear those things. I just think we need to live life. Like I always say, go out there, connect with people, help people. That's how you fight the system. That's how we grow as human beings. And I think throughout this entire Secrets of the Solomon Islands series, I think that's what we can always end with. On any theory, we can always end with that aspect. All this craziness going on, whatever it's leading to, how we combat it is by helping others and growing together. And that's it, guys. I really appreciate it. This was an absolute blast doing this series. I didn't even know I was going to do this long of a series, but it was so in-depth, and at least what I was reading, and I said, you know what, I need to do just as an in-depth presentation on this because I don't know if anyone's ever done that before, and I wanted to do it. I wanted to talk about all of these wild stories coming out of the Solomon Islands. Before I leave, though, I am going to read some reviews like I do every week because I really appreciate you guys giving me 5-star reviews across all platforms. I really appreciate you sharing the show across all platforms, commenting, liking, subscribing, all that good stuff. I really appreciate. We're going to start with Apple Podcast. We've got Eddie Thing, Next Level of Truth Unveiling. Not your average paranormal truth-seeking podcast full of wild strangeness and intrigue. Joel has a unique perspective of examining each lore from different angles. He presents each situation he explores from the beginning and leads you down alternate paths to think about. Thank you for this platform that you've gifted us with. I really appreciate that, Eddie. I try to do that every time I do a show. You know, I hope I can grow with each show, get better and better, and present new information that I discover. And maybe I'm wrong with that info, but maybe it piques your interest to find something that is a little more in line with what you think. We got to share Martok, Free the Rabbits. Joel is open-minded and takes time to do the research. Looking forward to what he has to say. I appreciate that to share. We've got A Heron Flow, 5 stars. Joel Thomas offers a no-nonsense perspective on the occulted, hidden nature of our reality. I like that. You know what occulted actually meant. Some people think it's something evil. It actually means hidden. The man has a huge heart and always brings the heat. Really appreciate that. A Heron. I'm going to jump to Spotify. Guys, I'm sorry if I haven't done Spotify the last couple shows. Spotify was on some sort of hiatus with comments, and I wasn't getting any because they did some sort of reworking of the system behind the scenes, but now I'm starting to get them back, so I will start reading them every week too. We've got Justin Williams. Love the show. Keep it up. And what's your best advice for a parent of young children? Pray. That's it. I don't know what to tell you, man. like we all just figured it out. Everybody's got to figure it out as a parent on what to do with your kid. I don't have a lot of advice outside of that. Just listen, be loving, know they're going to screw up. Don't beat them over the head when they do. Obviously set up parameters and rules in place. Doesn't mean that you don't take away, punishment or whatever when they step outside of those lines. But at the end of the day, you need to help them grow. Jeremy D. Holden, awesome show, brother. Love your music and love the podcast. Keep at it. And I can't wait to hear some freaky biblical stuff too. Much love in Christ, brother. Appreciate that, Jeremy. We got 4362 Mont. Most cogent description of Project Blue Beam and the possibilities thereof. I was starting to think I'd never hear it as more of an ambiguous label. Thanks, Joel. 4362 Mont, appreciate that. And that's why I did the Project Blue Beam. I was in the same boat as you. All I heard was it being an ambiguous label for one thing. And I really wanted to put the time and effort so people actually knew what that theory is, what it actually meant, and not just that one little small aspect of it. We're going to jump to YouTube. We've got Zoe Mick 9687. Glad to find this show. Glad you found it too. Share it to your friends. Would love that if you did. Real MP HUKNJ. Thanks, YouTube, for dropping me off here. This is right up my alley. I love when YouTube does that, when the algorithm just shoots it to a random person and they don't know who you are. Like, whoa, this is awesome. Appreciate that. We got Shelby6549. How can I find the intro song? I'm really digging it. I have been getting hit up by a lot of people about the intro song. It is not available on any platform right now, but I've told people if I get a large influx of people reaching out to me that want the song to be released on platforms, let me know. And if I get enough, I will release it. All right, guys, I really appreciate you being here this entire time. This was so much fun. I can't wait to jump to the next subject now that we're off of the Secrets of the Solomon Islands. But this was a fantastic mini-series, and I love bringing this info to you. Hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully it made your interest peak a little bit about what's going on in these Thousand Islands. And as always, on the way out, I'm going to play one of my songs. I'll be playing Adios from the Shape of Shadows soundtrack, which is streaming on all platforms. Just type in Adios Joel Thomas. Guys, you know how we do it before we get out of here. Go outside, touch grass, and get your tail out the hole.
Everything I love, they hold on to pride, unbalance the scale. God is living in hell. Every rabbit tail I'm chasing down a corridor seems to lead me to another crumb I can't ignore. What happens when the ceiling is the floor? Sanity lurks behind the door. Their goal is to divide your intelligence implied, but I think you're infantile, and I don't know why I try. Hey, man, I'm getting tired of showing you the lies. You're so caught up in the height of the unlimited supply. Ay, ay. When I think reality is concrete, cracks from the truth begin to taunt me. Ghosts from another time tried to haunt me, but all they brought me was the past on a loop. When I think reality is concrete, cracks from the truth begin to taunt me. Ghosts from another time tried to haunt me, but all they brought me was the past on the loop. What's behind the curtain? I don't know. I'm digging into things. They say I'm on a spectrum, grasping at these threads